All right. So, Rich Bradley, and Executive Director of MSPA Americas, which is the official trade association for the mystery shopping industry since 1998, and part of a global alliance with MSPA Europe and Africa and MSPA Asia Pacific.
Very cool. And can you tell the listeners about, as the president of the MSPA North America in 2015, what are some of the bigger challenges that you faced in strengthening when it comes to industry standards?
Yeah, it's always finding good talent, good shoppers. It's not the type of gig that you're going to quit your day job, right? So a lot of people do it as a part-time thing to pick up some extra money, especially the younger folks. Older folks might be retired or semi-retired, and so same thing. They just don't want to sit around and looking for something to be useful at. But because you want to do it doesn't mean you're good at it. Like often we'll have people say, "Oh, I worked in the restaurant industry, so I'd be a good mystery shopper there." You, as a mystery shopper, you really don't go in and set your own sort of values or your own experiences and marry them to what you're doing. It's more that the client has certain things they're looking for. And as a result, they're going to create a form of information that you're going to gather it on. And so it's really about your powers of observation, attention to detail, and then being able to articulate those details into the form so that you provide the information that ultimately the client's looking for. And it's always a challenge, I think, to find good people who understand that process and can follow it through.
That's interesting. Do you know about the history of where the industry kind of came from at all that you could tell us about?
Yeah, I do. So it was really started by Macy's in the 1940s. They were looking to evaluate their associates and see if they were living up to the Macy's standards. And as part of that, they created this sort of program to measure that by having shoppers who were hired specifically to look for those standards. And a lot of companies kind of did it on their own. It seems like the 70s, 80s, you started with third party companies who would come in and do those evaluations. And it's, because if you're doing it internally, there's always the potential for bias, right? Even though it's anonymous, there's always the potential that somebody feels like, whether it would ever happen or not, it's another thing, but they feel like, well, maybe my bosses find out I wrote this evaluation, especially if there's some critical information in there. So it's really evolved to where that third party process is really important so that there's no even potential for bias in there. And in 1998, a number of these companies were just sort of doing this around the country, not in any way unified, but several of them reached out to each other and said, we should come together, kind of like in sports, right? Like in sports teams, they compete against each other on the field, but off the field, they have each of the teams have some common goals. And it was kind of the same way there, where obviously every company was competing for business and competing for clients. But outside of that, there were legislative issues, there were insurance issues, there were finding shopper issues that everybody was facing. And so that's how the trade association, MSPA, came together in 1998. And as I briefly mentioned before, what happened was some owners from companies in Europe and Asia would start coming to the MSPA conference. And then there were so many companies in their countries or their continent that were doing this, they formed their own chapters, and that's how you got MSPA Europe and Africa and MSPA Asia Pacific.
Can you describe what makes somebody good at mystery shopping? What are the
That's
characteristics?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ralph. The number one thing is the ability to follow directions and pay attention to details. Probably number two. The way the process works is the mystery shopping company as well as the shopper are really sort of the channel for the end client to get the information that they're looking for, right? So it's the client that writes the guidelines as to what they want, how they want it, the step-by-step instructions, the form that the questionnaire that gets filled out after the visit, all of those data points and questions to get to the data points, that all comes from the client. And so then it's the mystery shopping company's job to recruit independent contractors to fulfill the instructions that have come from the client. So as I mentioned earlier, you can't really make up your own, you know, questions or data points you want to monitor. It's really about reading those instructions and understanding what the client has ultimately hired you to do and being able to follow that faithfully. Because if you turn in a report and it's missing data points that were requested or they weren't done right, then the client will reject it. And when the client rejects it, neither the mystery shopping company nor the shopper end up getting paid and reimbursed if there were expenses. So that ability to follow details is really, follow directions is really important. And then gathering those details as requested is a close number two. The third thing would be, now that you've followed the directions, you've gathered the details, using precise words that capture your experience such that when somebody's reading this report, they really vividly can see what you saw, what you heard, what you smelt, what you tasted. They can be in your shoes and relive that experience. Because unlike a survey, which gathers a small amount of broad data, a mystery shop is a very specific snapshot of an experience in time. And what that shopper is really trying to do when they do the report is put the person who's going to read this in their shoes and experience the same sensory perception as much as possible as to what the shopper did.
Would you say that technology has influenced your industry at all over the years?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, right? Because um, when the industry started and up until about 2000, 2001, this was a massive paper and postage industry. So, the forms would be copied, mailed out to the shoppers. The shoppers would handwrite the forms. There'd be a self-addressed stamped envelope that they'd send the report back. On Monday morning, there'd be this massive mail dump, and staff would have to go through and organize and sort the reports and go through them. So data technology changes, going online very much changed the industry right around the turn of the century, made it much easier, much more cost efficient for everybody. And then the next thing that really came along, Ralph, was and you might remember this. It's maybe not as common now, but there was a period where a lot of businesses, particularly restaurants, grocery stores, were offering at the bottom of a receipt. And some people still do it, but go to this link and fill out the survey about your customer experience. Right? There was some panic in the industry about that, like, oh my gosh, these online survey receipts are going to wipe mystery shopping out. But here's the thing: people have a very small tolerance for that. They have like a 3 to 4 question tolerance. You start going much deeper than that, they start Xing out and don't finish the survey. And in the early days, you may remember there needed to be an incentive to even get people to do it. So, like Albertson's grocery store, if you did their survey, they'd get a code at the end, and you could take that and get a free loaf of bread the next time you came in. McDonald's still does those surveys, and I think they usually do a buy one, get one sandwich if you fill it out and get the code at the end. So again, there was a lot of panic on that. But the thing was, when you're only collecting a few data points, it's not the same as somebody spending 15 minutes to an hour in your place and the human element of all of that data. So that panic was a bit overblown. They're still out there. And, I've always looked at it as almost like a cube. Like, if you really want to understand your customers, your employees, the impact of your employees on your customers, all the gaps between the team, the brand, and the guest, then you should look at multiple styles of measurement, right? So at the high end, you have survey, which is going to get you some broad stuff, but very limited data and not very personal. Then as you work your way down, you can get to mystery shopping, where it's a lot of data across the board. And then if there are like two or three things that you really want to hone in on from that data that came from a mystery shop, we'd say we'll go to a focus group and just focus on those two or three things that came out and drill deep into that. But a lot of companies, to be honest, don't do all that. They usually pick a methodology and stick to that. Maybe some will do two, maybe survey and mystery shop. But that's how I would see it. Is it's almost like a mountain, and how far down do you drill into the mountain to get as much data as possible?
Yeah, so it all comes back to data. Interesting. I'll have two more questions, and I'll let you go. Looking ahead, what do you see as the future of mystery shopping, and how might it continue to evolve in the next decade or so?
I think the one thing that started recently and will continue to go this way, mystery shopping was always an objective snapshot of the past. Like there was no emotion in it. The clients and therefore the mystery shopping company didn't want your emotion. They didn't want your opinion. They simply wanted to know yes or no. Did the person smile at you? Not was the smile, did you feel the smile was genuine? I think as a culture, we've moved away from just empirical data to more emotional data, touchy feely data. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing at all. I'm just noting the change where this industry started with very objective yes or no's. And it's now moved into you need that as a baseline so that store A and store B and store C can all be measured on a baseline. But I'm seeing more and more emotional, human, subjective feeling. So, yes, the person smiled at me. Next question, did you feel that smile was genuine, natural, and authentic? Now, that's not an objective data point, that's a subjective one. And again, I think that's valuable. I'll give you a very quick real life story from a company I ran 10 years ago. It was an auto dealership, and they had 10 objective questions. Did the person answer the phone? Did they answer it within four rings? Did they identify the name of the dealership? Right, all objective stuff. And what was happening was they were getting perfect tens on all of that. Yet their customers were not happy with how the person sounded on the phone. So on the objective score sheet, this person's an all-star, yet people were complaining about the person who regularly answered the phone. So they started adding some of these more subjective questions like, did she identify herself? Did she answer in four rings? Did she identify the dealership? And then they started asking, how did you feel about the way she did that? And that's where they were able to capture that. Well, she's doing the thing she's supposed to do, but she's not giving off this positive halo that they were hoping, as sometimes that phone call is the first instance of dealing with the brand. And she was kind of a miserable person, and it was coming through the phone. So that's the biggest change I see. And I think it's going to continue to grow in that direction where you need to capture some objective baseline data, but then it's going to be overlaid like, okay, now they've checked the boxes. Now, are we putting the right boxes out there to check? Because is that making our guest or our customer feel like they're valued, and so that our policies are hitting on what it should be? And I think it's just going to continue to blend those two together, which I do think is a positive.
And I asked this. Thank you for spending time with me today, and as far as this interview. But I asked this of all of our guests: is there any advice that you could give to these kids as they go off in the world and kind of figure out what they want to do?
Yeah, one thing I would say, Ralph, is in the hospitality world, because we do a lot of we have a company that does all kinds of customer experience measurement that's also a part of MSPA. And one of the things, I'll give you a very, again, specific example. There's an NBA team that we work with. And when we were called in, their customer experience ratings were really bad. And we've worked with them 4 years and they've really come up. But one of the things we've been coaching and training them on is what identifying what their perception of the guest in the arena was, and trying to move that towards thinking about those guests as being guests in the person's own home. Like, where their home was the arena, and taking ownership of this is our home in the arena, and you have these guests coming in. And so now, how do you make the guest feel special and welcome in your home, just as if you were throwing a party? And I think that mentality of not looking at them as customers who are a pain in the butt, but more like these are valued friends of mine who are coming to spend a couple hours with me. What can I do to make their experience so good that they feel welcome and that they feel at home in here? I think that's the one point that we find a lot of people, whether they're younger or older, don't get about customer experience delivery. You know, changing that, doing that paradigm shift to a work assignment of having to do these tasks versus hosting an event. And it doesn't have to be an arena, right? It can be a dinner, right? So you're a server, and so the table you're waiting on is just not the table you got to process, but approaching with this mentality of my friends are here, even if you don't know them. These are my friends, and I want them to leave saying, "Wow, that was a great experience. I had a great time." You know, and in self-interest, that's where you'll get bigger tips on something like that too. But so yeah, I think if you're going into that hospitality world where you engage with guests and customers, starting with a mindset of these are my guests and I'm going to take care of them just like I'd take care of my own friends or my family if they were here. I think on the broader scale, Ralph, the biggest thing that we run some leadership programs for young folks, and one of the biggest things we always talk about is what's your passion and what do you like to do, and that's where you need to start paring down the industries, because it's like that cliche saying that if you're doing what you like to do, you're not really working. I can tell you that's the case in my life. The things that we do, we love. We work 7 days a week. We have 4 companies and work 7 days a week, but we love what we do, and it's just part of our life. And so there's so many things to do out there, especially today with all kinds of different options. The key is to really find your passion. And the last bit of advice I would say there is that people sometimes think what they do is what they're going to do forever. And I know it can feel that way, but that's really not the case. It's just a chapter, right? And so if you go into one lane of something to do and you go, this isn't really what I thought, that's okay. Switch lanes, because you've got many, many chapters in your book. And I wouldn't get hung up on, I've got to make the perfect right decision right off the bat. Go to the one that seems like the right one and give it a shot. And maybe it is, and maybe it's not.
I love it. Thank you so much, Rich, for taking the time to talk to me today and being a guest on the show. We appreciate you, and we wish you all the best of luck, man.
Okay. Thanks so much, Ralph. It's been a pleasure.
Bye.
Bye bye.